Hi, everyone. I think I'm going to go first, and then Kathy, if that's right, I'm going to go. You're going to go following me, right? Well, thanks, everyone, and Kate. That introduction was far too long and far too generous. So thanks. I want to start by bringing greetings to everyone at convention from everyone in Local 305, of which I'm a very proud member. Those of us in Local 305 try to be active as best we can in these challenging times, and some are far more active than others. I also want to thank Kathy for inviting me to give this talk at convention. Many of you will know that I really enjoy being given the opportunity to speak at convention, even though this format leaves a lot to be desired. What I want to do in the few minutes that I have today is to discuss with you what the COVID-19 pandemic says about the larger food system, both here in Canada, but also internationally. A starting point for talking about the pandemic is to disavow something of a myth. There's a very commonly held belief that the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19 emerged in Huanan market in Wuhan, China, as the result of an interaction between an animal and a human. But this idea that the virus emerged as a result of this interaction between an animal and a human is really just a belief. Yeah, it may be widely held, but it's just a hypothesis. It is likely that the virus passed through an intermediary animal, but the first recorded case of the virus has been traced to a patient treated on the 17th of November in Hubei province in China who had no connection to the market whatsoever. And France's first recorded case of COVID-19 was actually recorded afterwards. Was found to have been treated on the 27th of December in a Parisian suburb, a few days before China announced the arrival of the virus. And only this week, Italian researchers have published results indicating that COVID-19 was circulating in the north of Italy as early as September of 2019. So the transmission vectors for the COVID-19 pandemic have certainly not been traced. And in fact, they're unlikely to ever be definitively known. But having said that, the scientific consensus remains that the virus most likely originated in horseshoe bats. Now, there is a possibility that the center of origin of the virus was a mine in Yunnan province in China. But again, on this, the jury is out. But the reason why bats play such an important role in the COVID-19 story is because bats live in close proximity to both domesticated and wild animals. And the fact that bats live in such close proximity to animals points to the possible importance of understanding links between the emergence of what we call zoonotic diseases and animals raised for food. Zoonotic diseases are human bacterial and viral infections that originate in animals and which then cross the species barrier, infecting us. Zoonotic transmission from animal to human probably originated in the very origins of farming, and so it is as old as agriculture. But the evidence that we have is that zoonotic transmission from animal to human has accelerated in the 21st century. The number of viruses, the number of pathogens which have jumped the species barrier seems to be increasing. And then in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, if zoonotic transmission from animal to human is increasing, it's important to understand why. So what I want to do is put this fairly bluntly and then explain why I'm saying what I'm saying. So to put it bluntly, the food system in China, in Canada, and in many other parts of the world operates as both a propulsion for and a nexus through which pathogens of very diverse origins, like the COVID-19 virus, migrate from the most remote rural reservoirs of infectious disease to the most international of population centers. The food system acts as a transmission vector. And that's one of the reasons why for many of us, including unfortunately myself, that do research on food systems, the pandemic did not come as a surprise. And in some ways, in fact, we've been relatively lucky because, again, those of us who think about these issues around food systems and disease believe that this pandemic has been, believe it or not, comparatively mild. It's not been the quote unquote big one that many of us have been expecting and some of us still do expect. So we need to understand why the food system facilitates the spread of new pathogens. And in order to understand this, we have to understand the links between contemporary pathogens like COVID-19 and the food systems on which we rely. Now, here at Convention, we understand not only the failures of industrial agriculture, but indeed the threat that industrial agriculture poses to the livelihoods of family farmers, of workers, and also to the climate. A food system built on industrial agriculture and cheap food needs cheap labor, both on and off the farm, as well as an environmental sink that does not enter into the prices faced by the corporations that dominate industrial agricultural production, processing, distribution, and retailing. An important part of industrial agriculture is meat production. 70 billion land animals are killed for food every year on our planet. Corporate control in Canada's industrialized meat production and processing is very, very strong. Canada's meat production and processing sector as a whole was worth about $28 billion in 2016. The average Canadian consumes about 70 kilos of beef, pork, and chicken a year, and the average Canadian household spend $1,100 a year on meat. But Cargill, JBS, Maple Leaf, and Olymel control nearly all of Canada's meat production. 3 meat processing plants in Canada account here for 95% of all beef production in the country. And so the money that we spend on our meat finds its way into various corporate pockets and not the bank accounts of small and medium scale family farmers. This much is reasonably well known by people here. But for many, a less recognized byproduct of industrial livestock production is that it breeds its own diseases, like swine flu and avian flu, in confined animal feeding operations and on factory farms. And we've seen this anew only in the past few months. COVID-19 itself mutated into a new form of the virus on mink farms in Denmark in the summer, from which that mutation was then transmitted to mink farm workers. Other outbreaks of mutated COVID-19 on mink farms have been reported in Poland, France, the Netherlands, and in Sweden. This resulted in the Danish government giving the order to cull all 18 million mink being raised in the country in order to stop the spread of this new variant of COVID-19, out of a fear that this new mutation would significantly reduce the effectiveness of vaccines that are currently under development. And so to date, 11 million mink have already been culled in Denmark to prevent the spread of this mutated COVID-19. So new pathogens emerge even as old ones are spreading. At the same time, industrial livestock farming methods significantly enhance the virulence of those viruses that do emerge from factory farmed pigs, poultry, and others before they cross from animal to human. And this is because industrial livestock farming significantly weakens the resistance of animals to pathogens, even as the massive applications of antibiotics to combat pathogens in some jurisdictions contributes to antibiotic resistance, cumulatively worsening the problem of new pathogens. So as one writer has very nicely put it, big farms make big flu. More precisely, big livestock farms make big flu. But of course, COVID-19 did not originate in industrial livestock. Nonetheless, industrial livestock marginalizes that livestock produced on small and medium scale family farms by producing commodity meat for supermarkets that is cheap. And family farmers producing meat by alternative production methods simply can't compete. Now, one survival strategy for family farmers in developing countries marginalized by industrial livestock production is to move to less cultivated, often forested areas where they encroach on wilder habitats, putting in place a possible transmission channel by which animal viruses can be transmitted to their livestock and from there to humans. But a second survival strategy for family farmers marginalized by industrial livestock, both here in Canada and around the world, is to move into niche markets where meat corporations don't operate. And they move into these niche markets because non-traditional livestock has a higher value. So for example, where I used to live in Holland, family farmers often raised ostriches and llamas because European Union restrictions on other livestock meant that they diversified into these niche markets. In China, one group of these higher value niche market products are animals that were once caught in the wild and which have not traditionally been bred in captivity to be sold as food. So I'm thinking about snakes, turtles, civets, pangolins, beavers, mallard ducks, other traditionally wild animals. So in China, some small-scale livestock farmers have started raising wild animals, so-called in captivity, because they cannot compete with industrial livestock production. And this then can create the opportunity for pathogens to cross from non-traditional farmed animals to conventional livestock and from there into humans. Indeed, when farmers raise non-traditional farmed animals are successful in exploiting the opportunities afforded by niche markets, this creates incentives to increase the scale of their activity, which amplifies the possibility of zoonotic transmission. And in China in particular, this has been a very well-established route by which small-scale livestock farmers, unable to compete with Chinese industrial livestock production, have been able to survive and craft a viable livelihood. So even though COVID-19 did not originate in industrial agriculture created the preconditions for the transmission of the virus from bats to non-traditional farmed animals, and from there, perhaps via traditional livestock, into humans. At the same time, industrial livestock production is slaughtered and butchered by the meatpacking and processing industry on an industrial scale, in which workers work in unsanitary and frequently unsafe conditions. This also amplifies and magnifies the conditions for the virus to spread. It's no coincidence that the Cargill meat processing plant in High River, Alberta, saw 950 cases of COVID-19, the single largest outbreak that we've had here in Canada, or that the JBS meat processing plant in Brooks, Alberta, saw 650 cases of COVID-19. And these two plants alone are responsible for processing 70% of Canada's beef. Now, the workers at the High River plant knew that they were working in unsafe conditions. Before the first cases in High River were confirmed, workers from the plant wrote a letter to management stating, quote, "We, the workers and our families, are worried and scared for the possibility that we might bring the virus with us home," unquote. Yet in the case of the High River plant, the last occupational health and safety assessment of the plant before any cases emerged was conducted via cell phone and video. And the operation via cell phone was given the go-ahead to stay open despite crowded working conditions that make physical distancing all but impossible. So industrial livestock production and processing has created pathways through which both new pathogens emerge and their spread is amplified and magnified. And so in this way, there is a comorbidity between COVID-19 and the food system. This, to me, is, if you like, a truth that has not been said by our politicians or by the corporations that dominate the food system. Now, the answer to the challenge of this comorbidity is not the further regulation of livestock production. Industrial livestock production benefits from the business environment produced by food safety regulations because even in the wake of inadequate enforcement, compliance costs cut the competition from small and medium-scale livestock producers. Now, the only answer isn't more regulation, but rather, and I'm entirely serious here, the eventual phasing out of industrialized livestock production. Now, this should be done not only because it facilitates the emergence of new zoonotic diseases, but also because the industrial livestock's production's impact on climate change serves to ultimately undermine the biophysical foundations of agriculture and farming. In 2017, livestock digestion alone accounted for 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture in Canada. And so small and medium scale livestock production on family farms needs to be supported and needs to be made more financially viable. This is because livestock production on family farms can raise stronger, healthier, less disease-prone, and tastier animals in smaller numbers and in more environmentally friendly ways. And this is precisely the reason why the National Farmers Union supports food sovereignty. As our own website suggests, food sovereignty ensures that the rights to use and manage livestock should be in the hands of those family farmers that raise livestock and not in the hands of the corporations. Livestock should be managed in ways that reflect the ecological conditions of the farm, raised in ways that conserve resources, maintain high animal welfare standards, and minimize negative impacts on the environment. And in this way, livestock production fits right in with the principles of agroecological farming. This has the potential to deliver very high yields of animal protein for small and medium scale family livestock producers, as well as having them receive a price that reflects their cost of production. And in so doing, livelihoods for small scale livestock producers in Canada would be protected. So what I'm saying to you here is that industrial agricultural practices, and particularly livestock practices, have created the epidemiological conditions in which zoonotic pathogens like COVID-19 can thrive. And as a result, a major part of the solution to preventing future pandemics is to build food sovereignty. Now, this to me is a very urgent task. Farmers and workers are at the losing end of a food system in crisis. This is so whether it's the family farmers who can't sell their superior meat because they cannot compete with industrial livestock on price, or whether it's the grocery store workers or on the meat counter who put their lives at risk for low wages, or the temporary foreign workers on whom so much of Canada's farming sector in some parts of the country relies. Farmers and workers in the food system are the expendable links in a food system that has been forged by government policy to disproportionately benefit the rich and the powerful. COVID-19 is precisely a symptom of why the food system must be transformed. Thanks. And sorry I went on longer than I thought, but now I'll pass it over to Kathy.